taking control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. The little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Slaves to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Feel your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We've watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at spacedoutradio.com, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Game on! Game on! Game on!
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
The password is...
Alright.
Okay, seriously, what's with the pointies?
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
Seriously, Dave? Really?
Hi, Chloe. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Captain, take your seat on my left. It's time for takeoff.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, start, 2, 1, boost ignition, and liftoff.
Just to be there with you, and I still trip over my feet, and my heart still skips a beat. I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, and it's good to have you along for the ride on this Thursday, March 2nd, or Friday, March 3rd if you're on the East Coast. We are live right here in Uncle Jimbo's cabin, right here in the Great White North, as we are here 7 days a week. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key in Noonan, Georgia. At spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, Renegade Talk Radio, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio. Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy, is the man behind our music. Bumblefoot rocks us in and out of every show, as he is the official sound of SOR. Hey, if you're a social media junkie like I am, follow us on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes. We're also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher. And of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. And if you go to patreon.com, we have some really cool offers up there for you right now. Our listeners, we want you to take care of them. Make sure you check those out, patreon.com. If you want to take part in this show, you got to sign into one of the chat rooms, either on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, on the UPRN chat room, or on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. I'll get to your questions and comments in there as well. If you head to our website, spacedoutradio.com, for just $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. We offer some decent swag, and it's our opportunity to give back to you. We also have a cool new news section called The Encounter that deals with everything paranormal, courtesy of our editors, Eric Markham and Everett Thiemer. You can check out my latest blog there as well on science versus opinion. And if you've had an experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our researcher, Mike Schmidt, is ready to find out what is going on. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on our brand new affiliate as of tonight, WQEE 99 The Key, to the Spaced Out Radio family way down in Noonan, Georgia. You may recognize the name. That's where they filmed The Walking Dead. We're so humbled and thankful to Ryan and the crew for getting us on WQEE. It's great to be back on terrestrial radio once again. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoy this show every single night as we are here 7 days a week. Thanks for sharing your nights with us. Make sure you give WQEE 99 The Key a Facebook page a like. Make sure you tell them you heard Spaced Out Radio on there as well. We are also live in Las Vegas on Renegade Talk Radio. We are live on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Tonight, I know some of our listeners are going to be uptight about this subject, but for research purposes, sometimes you have to get a little uncomfortable in order to find the answers needed to potentially solve the unknown mysteries of the universe. And this is why Dr. Rita Louise, known for her amazing work in healing, intuitiveness, and ancient aliens, has come out with an amazing paradigm regarding the existence of God and how it ties to the ancients from a time before. Now, I have no problem going on the record and saying that I am a believer of God. I don't deny that at all. I will also say in the same breath that it's the man-made religion that I have troubles trusting my faith to. But as the world becomes more scientific and technological, we are creating a very large and boisterous sect of agnostics who no longer know who or what to believe. It may be a childhood experience that led them to this. It may be that their parents were non-believers. Who knows? We're all different. Holy Deception, a 1-hour movie by Dr. Louise, challenges you to re-examine the notion of God while looking at other cultures, both past and present, and what they have to say. Is our current perception of God actually a flight of fantasy? Could we have been deceived on our notion of a kind and benevolent, omnipotent creator? Let's find out. Dr. Rita Louise is here on Spaced Out Radio for the first time. I am so thankful to have her on tonight. Welcome, Dr. Louise. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. It is so wonderful to finally be here with you for a while.
I know. Yes. And you know what? I'm so excited to have you on because, as you heard in my intro, we are literally night one on WQEE 99 FM in Noonan, Georgia. I am so happy about that because, you know, it's been 10 years since, longer, 2007. Yeah, 10 years this year it'll be since I signed off the radio for the final time in Vancouver. And I remember after I signed off on my sportscast there, because I was a sportscaster, I remember I just kind of put my head in my hands and I started crying, and all my coworkers were around me and they were clapping, and because I knew at that time what I thought I would never be back on terrestrial radio. And lo and behold, a decade later, here we go. We're right here. It's amazing. So thank you for being our first guest back on terrestrial radio.
Well, and I hope that the listeners in Georgia enjoy today's show.
Absolutely. I think they will. Well, they better. We got to make sure we're performing well.
They
for them.
better.
I have stretched. I've done my hair. I'm looking good. And I know you're all dolled up as well, so let's have a good one in tonight. Dr. Rita, it's so much a pleasure. I have been following you since literally I got into this field a couple of years ago after I started having my experiences in 2011, which started for me. And every time that I was looking around, who do I listen to? Who can I forward? Your name always popped up. How did you become such an intricate part of this entire field that is blessed under the paranormal tree?
I work way too much. No, I mean, I think that the material that I produce, all right, a little background. And so my day job, I work as a medical intuitive and as a psychic. And so when you're doing that kind of work, there's my opinion, and then there's what I'm seeing or what I'm perceiving about the individual. And so when I produce my work, whether I'm writing, creating a video, or doing anything that is, for other people, it is really done in that way. It's not about my opinion. It's about, this is what the research suggests, and I'm really big on doing a lot of research and presenting that evidence. And some of the material that I've produced, I will go in with one frame of mind and come out the other end of the rabbit hole with a completely different view, because that is where I was led, and that is what I was led to believe. And so that's what I do.
Well, it's a lot of fun because you have so many different experiences. You study such a plethora of topics in regards to everything from the intuitiveness to ancient aliens that
ghosts. Don't skip the ghosts.
Okay, and ghosts too. But what amazes me about it is here you are coming from a scientific background in a totally different path than what mainstream science would suggest. How have you been able to interlock the two in your own research?
Well, my background, my degree is as a naturopath. And so, that already starts you out in the alternative world. And my PhD is in natural health counseling, which is, still in the alternative world. And I started to pursue those because I was working as a psychic, but always finding people's health problems. And the first question people asked was, well, what can I do about that? And I had no answers. And so, I've always been a researcher. I remember as a little kid, I've never really read, well, that's kind of a lie. I'm not particularly drawn to reading fiction. Every so often I'll read like a good Stephen King book or whatever. But I've always really been drawn to reading books on archaeology and anthropology and art history. And I joke around and say that I'm one of those kind of people that will read those dry and dusty books that sit on the bookshelf that nobody wants to read, and will take all of this various pieces of information, and somehow in my brain, I'm able to connect these puzzle pieces to come out with some other idea of what's going on. And I've always been that way. And so, I just shared that part of myself with people like yourself and your listeners.
At what point in maybe your childhood or adulthood did you realize that you had your own intuitive abilities? Is it a family trait, Dr. Rita, or is it something that, you as a person had to find out for yourself?
When I was about 30, so I'm kind of dating myself here, I had always wanted to be psychic. There was a TV show, The Amazing Kreskin, when I was growing up, as well as a different TV show called The Sixth Sense, which starred Gary Collins, who had ESP. And after viewing these shows, I decided that I wanted to become psychic, and I started reading and studied astrology and numerology and anything that I could get my hands on. And through the 80s, I went into this whole like self-help, personal growth, Shakti Gawan and all of those people, because that's what the popular reading was about. And finally found the Berkeley Psychic Institute and studied with them for 2 years. But what I discovered after being in their program for about 3 weeks was that I had been extremely psychic my whole life, and no one ever connected the dots. No one ever said, well, when you pick up a box and know what your Christmas present is, that's a psychic thing. I mean, even this is really bad. So this past Christmas, my boyfriend was doing something in my office that I couldn't go into because he was like doing something with my Christmas gift. And I walked by the door, okay, and I didn't look in. It has a glass door, and I intentionally did not look in. And I was like, he got me a gramophone. And sure enough, he got me a gramophone. Kind of wrecks the surprise.
It does. And you know what? My own intuitiveness started when I had an experience with the Angel of Death back on December 13th, 2011. 5 days later, my wife and I go to a concert of a big name band. I never mention the band. And a friend of ours who was single actually she wasn't single at the time. She's a former model. She had taken her stepdad to the concert with us, sitting right before 4 rows behind us. She had this boyfriend who she was madly in love with, and all of a sudden, it just came to me. I saw this lead guitarist standing on stage, just hammering away on his guitar, and I looked at my wife, and just for some reason I said, "That's our friend's new boyfriend." And she's like, "What?" I said, "Watch." Literally 2 minutes later, my friend comes running down from 4 rows down. She goes, "I am in love with him. Look at him. What is there not to love?" Well, lo and behold, we were bugging her all year, and I said, "It's going to happen. It's going to happen in 2012. I could feel it. I don't know why." She's like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah." November 14th, 2012, she runs into him face to face, literally walks into him at the Hard Rock Hotel in Vancouver, and they started getting together from there.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, it's one of the only good ones I have in regards to my own intuition. But sometimes it just comes to you. It's just like a flash, like that's going to happen. How are you able to tell in intuition, Doctor, when you have that ability to know exactly what's going to happen, like you said with the gramophone or with this story, yet other times the vision seems so clear and it couldn't be more polar opposite than what truly happens?
Well, and I think that when you practice, people think that, using your psychic abilities and using your intuition is just something that, is just there, and it's there. We all receive that information on different levels, but I think part of it is also learning to trust and learning to discern this is intuitive information and this is not. And I think for an individual, it's really the hardest. It's doing a reading and doing a session for a stranger is so much easier than intuiting your own stuff. And so it really just becomes a method of trusting, trusting that the information is correct. Because it'll be validated. I had this little flash about, he got me a gramophone, and I was like, okay, well, that was kind of weird. But then it was validated because he got me a gramophone, and when you validate, when you recognize that I had this thought and it turned out to be true, then when you have a different thought, you're open to the possibility that it's going to be true.
So as you started expanding your own mind and your own ability to your intuitiveness, what led you down the path of starting to research the topic of ancient aliens?
It was 2009, and they started putting out TV shows. I've always on some levels, believed in ancient aliens. Okay, that if you read the Bible and substituted the word God for alien, that it would read actually quite nicely. But it wasn't something that I had researched. But in 2009, they were coming out with shows about the end of the Mayan cycle and, December 21st, 2012. And they would talk about these myths, but they were not really clear. They would just say, well, the Mayans talk about it and the Indians talk about it. So now it got my interest up, and I started doing some research around that topic. And I was starting to uncover parallels and similarities in the mythic record that just took me down this giant rabbit hole. And so when I started my research, I didn't start the research looking for ancient aliens. I was looking for answers into this notion of a world myth that is shared by, cultures around the world. And that led me to the belief that there were ancient aliens in our past, or there were aliens in our past. I didn't go into the research looking for the aliens, even though, I had read the Zecharia Sitchin books and, all that stuff. But that wasn't, I didn't know if it was true, and I didn't put all of my belief in it. But when I came out the other end, that was the belief that I was left with, just based on the sheer amount of mythic record that supports the notions that there were extraterrestrials in our past.
Are you a firm believer that they helped build the societies? Are you a firm believer that they helped build the pyramids, help the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Incans create the society that they had? Maybe Atlantis?
Well, actually, I'm working on a new book that addresses that, not as far as the building part, okay, because that's not really my area of expertise, but I'm looking at the social aspect. And I do believe that this group impressed upon humanity our morals and our customs and our beliefs. And we are a product of that training. And terrible as that sounds, but I believe that we are an educated animal who has been trained to be a certain way. And that's why we see the same thoughts and same beliefs around the world, is because we were taught that. So, it's kind of a complicated topic. Sorry.
So as you get into this and you start learning more and more about the ancient alien theories comparatively to what we know as the Bible or other religions known as their holy books, what's the biggest differences that you see between the two? Let's just take the Bible here for now. None. That amazes me, that answer.
What I have found is that when you survey the mythic record from around the world, there is a consistent narrative that you find. And that narrative is supported in biblical texts. And so when I'm talking about the mythic narrative, what I look at, my area of focus is there's the Noah flood. And so that's kind of my ending point. And I move backward in time to the in the beginning part, because that's where myths are identified as creation narratives. And the Bible is amazingly consistent with these creation narratives, with one exception. In these other storylines, there are multiple gods, and they're fighting with each other and usurping power from each other and doing all of this crazy stuff. And in the Bible, we only have one God. And I joke around, and I don't mean to be sacrilegious in how I say this, but it is as if someone had a big thing of white out and cut out major stories and major narratives, because you can't have Kronos fighting Zeus because Kronos doesn't exist because Kronos is a god. And so you have to just eliminate all of that. And so what you actually find is an abbreviated summary in the biblical text. But it is remarkably consistent.
Is it a lot of fun, or is it a lot of stress looking up this information? Because to so many people, we could be blown away by this type of information on research, Dr. Rita, but for a plethora of other people, we would literally be looking at a lot of stress, wondering what our own path was. Were we told the truth in regards to what is happening in the Bible, what we're perceived as the creation of man? How do you look at it in your own studies? Fun or mystical in the journey?
It excites me. It excites me, you know. and then I'll find some weird, obscure text, you know, because I read those dry, dusty old books that nobody wants to touch. And actually, I really enjoy reviewing books that are from the late 1800s and early 1900s because they seem to be less edited. And when you are talking about indigenous cultures, you know, like the Australians, the Philippines, the Native Americans, it's these earlier narratives that are the firsthand people documenting these cultures. And so I try to get as close to source as I can. And they write stuff. I mean, there's this one book, The Gold Mines of Rhodesia, the Ancient Gold Mines of Rhodesia. And this guy is talking about all of these gold mines and locations of these ancient gold mines and gold refining areas in South Africa. And just, you know, nonchalantly, as he's talking in this narrative, he sits there and goes, oh, yeah, you know, and they found these graves, and there were the graves of giants in there. Just la, la, la. You know, where today, information like that from something that is presented in an archaeological perspective is edited out. And so I feel like they were much more forthcoming in just reporting the information versus editing it to be proper.
So do you think then, Dr. Rita, that it goes way back in time where this editing started, where they started maybe taking our minds maybe 400, 500, 600 years ago and kind of pushing it in the direction that they wanted rather than the evidence that is truly out there, the civilizations, the graves of true giants? What do you think?
I have kind of a two-part answer. And so in the more recent time, I'm going to say that in the mid-30s, the books that we see, the more scientific books that we see, have definitely been, edited, cleaned up, material that is out there, quote unquote, eliminated. So that's in the more recent times, but I feel like, and I hate to say this, but that the Abrahamic religious traditions have really done a disservice to our understanding of who we are and where we come from. When I wrote my book, E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legends Have to Say About Humanity, I started writing this book as just, to a general audience, and I had to stop and put in the book that it was really being written for individuals who were brought up in the Western world, in the Judeo-Christian world. Because when you step outside of those traditions, they believe in a sky god or sky heroes that interacted with humanity. They had gods that flew around on, silver discs. And so there's already this belief in extraterrestrials, not that they used the word extraterrestrials, in these gods that came from the sky that interacted with humanity. So on some levels, my book was preaching to the choir on a topic that they already had as part of their cosmology. It's just the Western world that we've lost that information, and it is, for many people, so hard to believe because it's outside the book.
But we're told that the book is supposed to be the be-all and end-all. And we are told that if we don't follow it, bad things can happen to us, to put it mildly. Yet we always seem to forget the point that the book has been edited numerous times to suit the likelihood of what kings wanted, to suit the likelihood of today's society, to suit the likelihood of what was happening in the 15, 16, and 1700s. So what then, if we look back on everything, is the true Bible?
I don't know. The only way that I can really answer that question is, one, that's part of the dogma of the faith. But it's not the only book out there. People go, but it's the truth. And it's like, but how do you know? How do you know it's the truth? Because somebody else told you it?
Well, the simple answer on that would be faith.
And so, but it's kind of invalidating, to people of other cultures, people that are of the Hindu faith or are Native Americans and follow that spiritual tradition, to say that what you believe in is false and you're going to go to hell. Ooh, can I say that? And
yes, that hold on, I got to check the Space Out Radio rule book. Yes, page 2, line 7. Yes, hell in a context of the devil is allowed on the radio. Yes.
Okay. And and so I don't know. I mean, it just leaves you in that place of you're putting all your eggs in one basket kind of thing. I don't know.
When you look back at the ancient side and what you were able to study, where does life, death, and reincarnation play a role in all of this? Because on the religious side of things, reincarnation, if you're a Christian and believe in Christianity, reincarnation is not supposed to happen. You die, you get a choice, or God makes a choice, brings you up to heaven or drops you down into hell. If you're a Catholic, you go to purgatory sometimes to, I'm sure is filled like Las Vegas with casinos everywhere. But on the flip side, there are so many different religions and so many different ways. How do we try and figure out what is right and what is wrong? Because there's so many interpretations.
And we don't know. We don't know. But if you look at some of the Gnostic texts, they also speak about the notion of reincarnation. So it was at one point in time part of Christianity, but was eliminated early on with the Council of Nicaea. But the reality is that there's only one person that died and rose from the grave, and he didn't talk about what was going on the other side. And so we don't know, but if we look at the cycle of life, things die and they come back. I mean, there is this cycle. And if we are souls, which I do believe we have a soul that, when we die, who we are, our consciousness, the energy, the chi that makes up who we are, goes somewhere. And, it would make heaven a very crowded place if people that lived here thousands, millions of years ago and went to heaven are still there and didn't get recycled. Kind of.
Well, you know what? A good quote. A good quote, Doctor, by Eric Markham in our chat room. And Eric is our resident scientist around here, because I think every radio show should have a scientist, especially if you're dealing in these topics. And I love his point here. He says, by Christian standards, Mohandas K. Gandhi should be burning in hell. Yet this was a man of peace, a man of love, a man who taught people to love each other. You know, he sacrificed a lot for the betterment of mankind. Yet, if we go on my faith, which would be Ukrainian Orthodox, well, you know, he's toasting alongside Hitler right now. So where's the fairness? And I guess that's what we have to try and figure out by going to the past to try and figure out what's coming in the future, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to me personally, you know, I think that, you know, people should walk their walk and talk their talk. And just because you go to church every Sunday or every Wednesday and Sunday and go to Bible study and, you know, tie 10% of your income to the church, but you are not a kind person and you're a judgmental person and you have all of these flaws, what makes you good enough to go to heaven? So, you know, but that whole notion is, you know, very much tied to, you know, the Christian doctrine, you know, and is, you know, part of the control mechanism, I think.
I got a question from Corey in our chat room here. She is asking, I've always been intrigued with the Bible, but I've always doubted if it's all truth. A good friend told me she only reads the King James Version. Can you, Dr. Rita, comment on that and what that would mean?
I'll come up with something.
Well, let me.
I mean, I think it's interesting that there are people that cling on to certain versions, certain translations of the Bible. Why that is, I don't know. I think for me, if I was going to be researching biblical texts, I mean, I will look at early Old Testament texts. But if you're looking at, you know, especially New Testament texts, because there are so many versions of it, you know, I personally would compare the different translations, because we don't know if when, you know, the Bible was translated for King James that he did a good job. We don't know. You know, because unless you go back to the original text or the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of it, we don't know.
And is that part of the mystery that is maybe turning a lot of people off religion? Because I have noticed, especially up here in Canada, we are becoming, because we are such a multicultural country, we are becoming very, very agnostic as a nation. Now, a lot of people will look back in the history and say, well, Canada was formed on immigrants. And I'm not getting into the whole immigrant debate here, because that is very much irrelevant in this conversation. But as time has gone on, people up here have started walking away from the church because maybe they have a problem with the religion, rather than wanting to seek out their own way and their own belief in spirituality. Because a lot of people out there, Dr. Rita, really are having a tough time in deciphering. If you look at the King James Version of the Bible, there's two different gods there. You have the spiteful, the vengeful God of the Old Testament, and then you have the peaceful, loving, enlightening God of the New Testament. And a lot of people aren't sure anymore what the translation is if we can't even get God straight on who he is in the Bible itself.
Exactly. You know, and I think on the West Coast in particular, you know, Vancouver obviously is on the West Coast. There is a lot more openness to people exploring themselves, exploring their beliefs, are more willing to step outside the box. You know, I live in Texas, and not that I'm from Texas, I just live here. And, and I moved to East Texas, and let me tell you, talk about being in the heart of the Bible Belt. And so, they are firm believers in what the book says. And, so even though what might be going on is outside of what feels right to them, they will still defer their thoughts and their beliefs to what they find in the book. And so even in that way, we're finding separation with people, those that will call themselves Christians and, that are kind of on the edge, and these people that are devout believers in what the book says.
Couple questions here from our audience, because we always like to get them involved early and often during the show. Loretta is asking, Dr. Rita, have you ever studied the Emerald Tablets?
I have gone through the Emerald Tablets. My issue with them in particular is that we really don't know where they came from. My impression of them is that they are actually a channeled piece of work and not necessarily something that came off of an edifice or a monument. And I am hesitant to really put a whole lot of credence into work that is channeled in that way.
We'll get to a question from Vivian now. She is asking, am I right to believe the Christian Bible or any religious book has been altered to suit each religion in order to control the masses?
I think that is a fair statement to make. Maybe a little teeny bit far-reaching if we're including all of the indigenous traditions around the world. But I think that is one of the things that we find. I mean, even in ancient cultures, they lived by a series of taboos, which were laws in and of themselves. And if you didn't follow that taboo, then the gods were going to come and have retribution, or an evil spirit would come and get you. And it is believed that in time that these taboos were revised to become our legal system, as well as the regulations that we find in our religious traditions. And so I feel like there has always been this level of social control put upon us, whether it's through laws or through the church. And the texts just support a much older tradition that was finally documented, on paper or stone or a monument.
Right. I love this question from Mario in one of our chat rooms on Spreaker. He is asking, Dr. Rita, what do you believe about human origins? Could you please explain how this ties to an alien agenda? And what do you believe is the actuality of God?
Okay, so I might have to get you to come back to part of the question, but I'll start with the human origins. And so when we look at the mythic record, we find two things that are very specific. And so, one part is that regardless of the culture you look at, it is always identified that God, in quotes, created humanity, or the gods created humanity. And when you look at this story narrative, we find one or two different possibilities. In cultures, and these stories are always interesting, and what excites me is they're not necessarily geographically based. But in a number of cultures, we find that humanity was created out of the earth or out of mud, which we find in the biblical story, which is a fairly consistent theme. And then the other theme we find is that humanity was created out of some kind of genetic material, which we also, to some extent, find in Genesis 2, with Eve being created out of the rib of Adam. When we look at the Sumerian record, there is one myth that talks about that the gods created a vessel made out of clay, and that the genetic material was actually put into this clay vessel. So now we have actually a merging of the clay / mud / earth narrative with the genetic material narrative, which I thought was very interesting. And so those are the two primary storylines, but bottom line to all of them, there aren't any stories about evolution or, us developing anything. It is always that we were created by the gods, period.
You use God in plural. You said gods.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Because it is only in the Abrahamic traditions that there is one God. In every other culture you find on the planet, they talk about a pantheon of gods. So I have to say gods.
So I understand that. When you are looking at the entire sculpture of these gods, albeit Greek, Roman, Hindu, whatever the religion is, how do we know which ones to believe? Or, in your opinion, are there some that actually are doppelgangers of each other, maybe of the same godlike entity?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I'm going to come back to is this notion of a global narrative. And so even when you look at the gods that we find from around the world, what seems apparent to me is that we are actually talking about a handful of gods that are represented around the world. We find a sky god who is kind of cranky. If we're talking about in biblical terms, the revengeful god. He is often tied to thunder and lightning. He is the god that is currently in control of this world. And we find that iconography, the images that you see of this god or his lightning weapon are remarkably similar. Characteristics that are tied to the sky god are remarkably similar, regardless of the culture that you look at. Similarly, if you are talking about the god who is most often associated with the actual creation of humanity, we are talking about a fertility god. Now, the fertility gods have a number of different characteristics. In many cultures, it is identified as being a half man, half fish, half man, half serpent, often identified as being the serpent in the Garden of Eden. This god loved humanity and educated humanity like a father would educate a child. But this god was also labeled as being a trickster. And not that he tried to trick the gods, but in my opinion, it was more that he had a level of consciousness, and from this level of consciousness took care of humanity, even if it went against the will of the gods. Thus, he was labeled a trickster. So like in Norse cosmology, that would be the god Loki. Because like, for example, Loki gave humanity fire, which helped us move along in our development process. And so regardless of where you look, we always find a god with these characteristics that are tied to similar items. And so when you start looking around, there again is this level of commonality that we're talking about the same people with the same story, regardless of the culture.
Getting into some pointed comments or questions that I have in regards to the whole ancient aliens theory in regards to this. There are so many different subjects, from energy healing to the elongated skulls, the crystal skulls. When you bring this all together, how do we decipher which mysteries are believable to our path in history compared to the ones that are maybe just mystic, made up by wizards and kings and preachers of the past?
And my methodology, and I talk about elongated skulls in this book that I'm working on, is I look for distribution. Because my thought is, there might be a local custom that you find in one culture which says that this developed over here, so it's probably just theirs. So, for example, right now I'm working on a chapter on circumcision, which, many people, I think like many people, that it was something that was only found in Judaism that, transferred into Christianity, the whole notion of circumcision. But what we find is that circumcision is found, or has been found, in just about every culture on the planet. And actually, and this is going to sound bad, but I'm going to say it anyway, they have uncovered Paleolithic male members, sculptures of male members that appear to be circumcised. So it leads one to believe that that practice actually goes back, to 26,000 BC. I mean, during the age of the Venus of Windledorf. So we're talking a really long time ago. And so when I look, but in Australia, for example, while they have the practice of circumcision, they also have this practice of subincision, which is, I'm not even going to talk about what it is. Just think, like, you think circumcision is bad, like multiply it by like 200, and that's subincision. Nasty, nasty. Why anybody would do that is beyond me.
No idea.
Anyway.
No idea.
You don't want to know. It makes a Prince Albert piercing sound good.
Well,
it's bad.
See, being Canadian and all, we just prefer, do you have a helmet or do you have a toque? It's one of the two, But
anyway, but that practice of subincision is only found in Australia, which tells me that it was isolated and it was a practice that they developed. But the notion of circumcision is found everywhere. And so that's what I key on. What do I find global distribution on? Because it says that it is a much more ancient practice, and it is a practice that there has to be some truth to it. And it wasn't like, well, I just decided that I'm going to squish the head of my child because it's going to make it look better. You know what I mean? Because elongated skulls we find around the planet as well.
Tell me a little bit more about these elongated skulls. For the life of me, I can't figure them out. And it's the same with the crystal skulls, where who would have carved them? Or are they real skulls of some sort of mystic creature back in yesteryear?
I mean, the elongated skulls is a very interesting phenomena. One, it's obviously a form of body modification, but it's not something that is done as a rite of passage. It is not something that is done with choice. I mean, it is, to elongate a skull, for people that aren't familiar, to elongate a skull, there are two methods that are commonly used. One is that a child will be, that boards will be placed on the front, like on the forehead and on the back of a child's skull, and they will kind of tie it together and bind the skull. And so as the infant begins to grow, instead of the head growing round, it grows taller and flatter. And this binding can be left on the head, up to 3 years, which you would think as the child is growing would be a very painful process. The other practice is they would put bands, like a headband, a really tight headband or ace bandage on the child's skull. And again, this would be left on their head for, 3 years until the cranial plates are fused. What they have found is that it appears that the bigger the head, the higher your social standing. And so the chief or the ruler of a group, based on burial finds, would have the biggest head. But why they started this practice, because it wasn't something that I could say, I'm going to go get my head elongated today. I mean, it was something that was done by the parents, and so why they would start the practice in the first place is strange. How they figured out how to do it and not kill their kids is even a bigger part of the mystery, because it seems like when we find the earlier elongated skulls, there wasn't like a build up to it. It was just kind of like, bam, now people have elongated skulls in various areas around the planet. And so we don't even have an evolution to its development, which we find in a lot of different things, that the knowledge and the information is full blown in some kind of a system or some kind of an understanding without any experimentation going along with it. And kind of tied to the elongated skulls is the concept of trepanation, where they cut a hole in the skull to, let out bad humors, to potentially repair where you got clubbed in the head and there was a fracture. I mean, it could have a medical purpose. But in the skulls that have been excavated, that have had trepanation done to them, that have been trepaned, they find that the individuals heal and they live after this intense surgical procedure. And in the 17 and 1800s, they tried to do this procedure on like mentally ill patients to let out the bad humors or the spirits that were tormenting them. But most of them died. And so there was a level of knowledge, there was a level of technology that our ancestors possessed that we've lost. And we're just now coming around to understanding how it was done. But think about it. In those days, there weren't any antibiotics. They didn't have hygienic practices, so nothing was sterilized. And they didn't have any kind of painkillers unless it was something natural that they could have taken, and we're going to say could have taken, to reduce the pain of both the surgery and the aftermath of the surgery.
We have less than a minute here before we are going to step out for our first break of the night. Dr. Rita Louise is our guest. Holy deception is the topic du jour here on Spaced Out Radio, and we are going to get into her 1-hour movie called Holy Deception in the second hour. It's going to be a good one. Once again, we want to welcome our brand new affiliate tonight on Spaced Out Radio, WQEE 99 Rock the Key, down in Noonan, Georgia, the home of The Walking Dead. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to broadcast to you live. We're back on terrestrial radio. God, I love saying that. That feels so good. 10 years in the making for old Davy boy. And we'll be back right after this.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com.
For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, News Director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest. From Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up, enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. Hour number 2 with Dr. Rita Louise coming up right after this. Before we bring the great doctor back on, I do want to remind you that we are live on Revolution Radio. It's a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. We are also live back on terrestrial radio after a 10-year absence on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Really appreciate you inviting us into your family, and I hope you enjoy the show. Let us know on social media what you think of Spaced Out Radio. We would appreciate that. Thank you, Ryan, for giving us the opportunity. And Ian Holt as well. Yes, you know Ian Holt around here, who's been a guest. He helped us out with this as well. So great to have you with us. We are also live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world on the United Public Radio Network, and we are also live in Las Vegas on Renegade Talk Radio. Good to have you with us as well. Tomorrow night on the show, our Keith Andrews is back. The ET Connection continues with Mr. Andrews at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. So make sure you are there for that one. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Mammothrept. Mammothrept is your password. Jeff, I see you got the definition already in the chat room on Spreaker. Appreciate you doing that. So make sure Mammothrept is used correctly, Space Travelers, for your password of the night. Hey, if you want to follow us on social media, you could do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Also, during the show, you could use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio in order to communicate with us live during the show. You can also give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. Give us a subscription there as well. You can also check us out on TalkStream Live, RadioGuide.fm, as well as on Stitcher. And our website, once again, is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including the brand new The Encounter Paranormal magazine. It's going to be interesting for you to read that up as well. Tonight we are talking holy deception. What is real and what is not in regards to religion, ancient aliens, the tie between the two. Dr. Rita Louise is our guest tonight. Doctor, welcome back.
Well, glad to be back, Dave.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this. Now, you decided to create a 1-hour short film in regards to the holy deception. Describe that movie for us.
It's really, really good, and people should rent it from Amazon or Vimeo. How that?
Perfect.
Not working for you, is it?
No, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Going to need a little bit more than that.
Okay. I mean, what the movie talks about in general is, you know, what our notion of God is as presented in the Western world. And in the Western world, God is presented as being kind and benevolent and all-knowing and omnipotent. I like that word, omnipotent. And, you know, the beginning and the end, I mean, there's a whole list of things that are tied to our notion of God. But when, again, you step outside of the Abrahamic traditions and look at cultures from around the world, the stories they tell of the gods, you know, because they have multiple, not just one, paint a very different picture of who or what God or the gods are. And that's really what the movie delves into without giving it all away in the first 5 minutes of the second hour.
Well, let's talk about why you decided then to create this movie. A lot of people won't go that far. A lot of people will want to just take their information, maybe write a book or some sort of dissertation on it, yet you decided to put it on film. Why go that route?
Well, I have been producing actually a number of video shorts over the last 6 or 7 years. of articles that I write or, other things that I produce in written form. This is actually my second film. I released a movie 2 years ago called Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancient, which looks at art and the iconography of art when we start, again, looking at it from a world perspective and commonalities that we find in the artistic record. And so this was just another aspect of this ongoing search that I have, looking at more and more places where we find this level of commonality. It's been interesting. I have to tell you, Dave, it's been interesting because I thought the title Holy Deception was like a winner. It just sounds really kind of cool, don't you think? But I think it freaks people out.
Well, you know what? I can see where it plays on people's fears. Okay, because as much as we may not want to play, as much as we want to play down religion, as much as we want to play down that it's not the popular thing to do in believing in a God or any type of spiritual entity anymore, there is still that human fear of what if? What if I screw up? Am I going to heaven? Am I going to hell? Am I going to be able to, beg for my forgiveness when I have my judgment? There's a lot of people who can act tough in front of you, but for most of them, it's a facade. And that's where I see people getting a little freaked out when we question whether or not there could be any type of holy deception, notice how I played that there, in their own personal beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the other part is that when people see that title, they think that it's like a religious movie. And it's not. I mean, I'm talking about God, but I'm not talking about God in a religious type context, or at least in my mind, it's not in a religious type context. It's more in a scientific type context, if that makes sense. If you can talk about God in a scientific context. But I don't know. It is what it is, and it's released. But I really have been enjoying, one of the things that I've noticed, because I've had my radio show, Just Energy Radio, that has been on air for, I'm in my 10th year of airtime, is that people are more likely to watch a film these days than they are to read a book. Sad but true, but it's true. And so that's why I have been spending some time actually creating video products to put out there to present my work as opposed to doing it in writing, because it's just a very different market that you are looking to interact with. And I find that from an introductory point of view into some heavy topic, it creates a launch point. People talk about my writing, and they say that I write in a very straightforward, easy to read manner, but that my work is jam-packed with information, and so, this makes, I have more room to present a simpler topic, and there's pictures, and they get to hear me talk and mispronounce words, and it's all good.
Well, I mean, hey, everybody can mispronounce a word every now and again. It's happened a number of times on this show. Not going to lie. We're not perfect. But on the flip side, like getting back to the whole topic of what holy deception can be about, do you think, though, that even though you're not trying to play on human fear with the topic or with the title of the movie, that when you thought of that name, did you think that maybe a lot of people would be fearful of viewing something like this, or think that maybe it's just another, if they're a religious or a believing type, that maybe it's just another scientific study that tries to prove there is no God around?
The part about the belief that there's no God around kind of entered my mind. The notion that it would play off of people's fears never entered my mind. The notion that people would see it as being a religious film never entered my mind. I mean, you know, when you name a book or you name a film, you sit there with a lot of pieces of paper throwing around words, throwing around concepts that are catchy, you know, and will make people want to read your little blurb thing that, you know, your synopsis of what it's about. And I don't know. Sad as it to say out loud, you know, it was the best name that I came up. It was the catchiest name, but it's also been the scariest, apparently, name, because I think people are a little bit afraid to touch it, which I find interesting.
I'm very curious. And now, though, Doctor, are you a believer in God?
You know, and I don't know if Giorgio Tsoukalos came up with this or where this actually came up with, but I am a believer in the big G God. I do believe that God, you know, underlies who we are and what we are and our universe and everything that we see in the physical universe, you know, in the subtle universe. I believe that God, whether it is a person or an energy or a consciousness, underlies that. I believe that we as three-dimensional beings who live on the earth, who don't really understand the nature of ourselves, much less the nature of the universe, can possibly understand God. And so I do not attempt to understand who that God is, but I do believe in, as well as the individuals who are talked about in the mythic record, as well as in the Bible, are not that God.
Do you believe then that the God who has been written about is the Alpha and the Omega, or do you believe that he is some sort of alien entity whom we are all praying to?
Well, and I think that there is a separation, you know, like Giorgio Tsoukalos would say, you know, there's the big G God, who is the Alpha and the Omega and underlying the universe, and then there's the small G God. And I believe that the one that's we've written about is the small G God, and the one that we pray to, we kind of go back and forth, because the concept of this big G God and then the gods that we interacted with have kind of gotten merged together and muddled and confused. There are a number of cultures around the world, indigenous cultures around the world, who also have this notion of this big G God who is the grand creator of everything. And then there are these gods that they interacted with, and they were able to separate out one from the other. You know, for us, you know, since there's only one God, it's very challenging for us in the Western world to make that separation.
I've always wondered what you thought God's role was in regards to the creation of this planet. If we are a creationist society and a creationist being, rather than looking at things all Darwinian, do you believe then that the planet was made before humans got here? Or do you believe that everything came out of a big bang and we just happened to, you know, come together as a few speckles of dust thrown in with some 80% water? Like, how do you think we came around then as humans?
Great question. In my book, E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legend Have to Say About Humanity, I actually addressed that very question and used the first chapter of Genesis and give it a different perspective, because it actually works. And I talk about each of these days being more epics in planetary conception. And it gets into the notion of the Big Bang Theory, and then it's like, and then it says, and there was light, and once the Big Bang happened, the first thing within 10 seconds, they estimate that the universe was filled with photons, which illuminated everything. And so could that be the reference to, and there was light? And it goes through the different days of creation from this notion of the Big Bang down to the creation of the earth, the plants, the animals, and finally humanity. I do feel as if this group of and so how that happened, outside my purview. Was it this group of gods that we're talking about that interacted with humanity that did that? I don't believe so. But I do believe that this group of gods, I don't like saying extraterrestrials because that's not what the mythic record says. And it would be me putting a word on it that is not their word, and I'm just reporting, that's my job. I'm just reporting. But I do believe that this group of gods were crucial in the terraforming of the planet. We have multiple stories from cultures around the world that talk about the creation of plants and trees and the formation of the mountains and and what's interesting, and you'll like this one, Dave, so because it sounds like you're pretty well read on the Bible. And one of the things that I found extremely weird was that in the text, and correct me if I'm wrong, but on the third day, God creates the trees and the plants. And then on the fourth day, he put the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky. But that doesn't make any sense from a scientific perspective to have plants with no sun, because plants need photosynthesis in order to work. And so when you look at that progression, it doesn't make any sense. Now, in my book, E.T. Chronicles, I come up with an explanation that, a possible explanation because, we don't know. But what's fascinating, Dave, is that when you look at cultures around the world, like in Sumerian texts, it talks about the battle between Marduk and Tiamat, the serpent Tiamat, and he kills her, and parts of her body become the trees, and her blood becomes the rivers and the oceans, and her hair becomes the trees. So there is this formation of the workings of the earth. And then it goes on to talk about how the sun, moon, and stars were put in the sky. We find the same narrative that comes out of Celtic cosmology. We find the same narrative coming out of Chinese cosmology. And the weirdest part is that this formation of the planet, the terraforming of the planet occurs, and then the sun, the moon, and the stars are put out in the sky. So it does follow the biblical narrative, even though the biblical narrative doesn't make sense.
So where does Jesus come into play?
I don't know. He's a latecomer in my game. I mean, I don't... once we get past the flood, I start losing interest. And once, historically, once we kind of get past Greek... once we get to the Romans, I've totally lost interest. They're not, it's not old enough for me. I like old stuff, really old stuff.
So, you're more Rolling Stones than Guns N' Roses, then?
Definitely. Oh. I'm a Janis Joplin kind of gal.
Oh, that's not a bad gal to be. That's not a bad gal to be. I do have a question from Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Canadian Joe is asking, do you think, Dr. Rita, that if advanced beings or aliens visited us in ancient times, that they would have been mistaken for gods?
Well, exactly, and I think that we have this notion of God. And so we just make the assumption, well, they said gods, but we don't really know what their thought of these gods were. Well, we do when we look outside biblical texts. But yeah, it's just the name that these individuals have been identified as and translated as. I was interviewing Stephen and Evan Strong, who are out of Australia, and they talk about their gods, but they don't call them gods. They call them sky heroes, because they, according to the indigenous culture there, the ones that they work with, they weren't gods. They were sky heroes. So we give them the name God. What these cultures actually call them vary. And in most Western books, I don't speak multiple languages and definitely don't read multiple languages. And so what they are called in other cultures, or I don't know, or how they're referred to, for example, in Sanskrit texts. I don't know. And that's really is an interesting question. I should do a little research of, because that is another very ancient system, and Egyptian, it's a very ancient system, but do they refer to themselves as gods? And I don't know. I don't know that answer, but I'm going to add that to my list of things to kind of check out.
So do you think then that back in the day, or even up to today, we're throwing around the word God or gods a little bit too frivolously then? Considering there's a plethora of gods that we are supposed to pray to and bow down to, and we're still trying to figure out which one is right and which one is wrong. But do you think ever since ancient times we've been throwing around that word a little too frivolously?
I do think so. I don't know where things kind of changed. But I think in contemporary society in particular, we throw that notion around way too much. Because there's only one God, and anything that is not that one God are fantasies of our ancestors. It's some fictitious belief and fairy tale that our ancestor perpetuated and, believed in that weren't true. But how are we to say that what they believed in wasn't true?
One of the topics that really interests me in regards to the ancient alien theory is there are so many depictions of spaceships and even creatures that look reptilian, creatures that look like they have elongated skulls, like they believe the Anunnaki had, and so forth on the hieroglyphics around the world, whether it's the Mayans, whether it's the Egyptians. Why is today's society, when we look back in time, refusing to bring those forward into the mainstream of what we have learned about hieroglyphics?
Well, and I think it goes to the point I just made, is that they look at anything that comes out of antiquity as being a fantasy, and as being the frivolous thoughts of a primitive people that couldn't identify and speak about something that was right in front of their face. And it's a joke. They were advanced enough to build the pyramids, which we can't do now, but they weren't smart enough to be able to identify and talk about what they saw with their own two eyes. It's a double standard. And with that said, We have that come out of the Sumerian culture, texts, epic texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh. We have coming out of India, the Ramayana and the Vedas. And I'm going to speak more specifically to the Sumerian because they literally carved their history into stone, using the cuneiform language. Now, why would someone generate multiple versions of a story in stone if they were just documenting a Danielle Steele novel when writing was something that was so critical to their culture and it wasn't something that was utilized frivolously? Why would you document some science fiction narrative? You would want to document something that was critically important to retain the society, not something that was for pleasure. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
When you look back at the whole ancient societies, where does Atlantis come into play on that?
There are no, or I have not found any record of Atlantis outside of the Plato reference. It's interesting. I listen to like books on tape. There's an app called Audiobooks, and you can listen to books that are in the public domain that people have recorded. And one of the books that was on there was Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And I just finished last week listening to that. That man was a consummate researcher. I mean, I have a copy of that book, and I'm going to pull it out because, in addition to what he talks about, he'll go, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. And then there'll be the notation of what book it came out of and the page number. So I'm like, man, this is even a great reference too. And he puts out some compelling information about this global narrative, about this global culture. So we have some options of what we're talking about. And in my opinion, there are primarily two. Well, maybe three. One is that the mythic record, the customs that we have are so old that they traveled out of Africa. And I say that because when we talk about Australia, it was inhabited about 40 to 60,000 years ago. So we're talking about those people were out of circulation for a very long time. When we're talking about the Americas, we're talking about 13 to 30,000 years ago that they were out of circulation. So one theory is that the stories we have are just that ancient. One theory. The other theory is this notion of Atlantis, where they were a sea-traveling group, and so the stories that we have that we find in the mythic record are actually their tales that were taught to these other cultures that have been passed along. Donnelly put Atlantis much more contemporary, but it leaves out Australia from the whole narrative. So that's a little problematic. And then the third notion is that it was this group of extraterrestrials that interacted. I mean, because there are clear stories of the gods interacting with humanity. And even in their narratives, it's like they taught us agriculture and metallurgy and the rite of circumcision. And they taught us all of this as well as our history. And when you listen to the stories, it's as if we have one person telling a bedtime story and they just tell the same story over and over again. And so it doesn't really change because they're just telling the same story over and over again. And so those are the three possibilities. With the Atlantis one, it doesn't account for this notion of the sky people or the sky gods or the gods coming down from the sky or the tenons coming down from the sky in their feathered cloaks or the swan maiden legends that we find in England and Scotland of these women who came down in their swan cloaks and would take them off so that they could bathe in the water. And then one day, a farmer comes and takes the cloak of one of the swan maidens who's now forced to live with him and marry him. And they have a family and children. And then one day she finds her swan cloak and puts it back on and gathers up her children and ascends back into the heavens, you know, which is a narrative that, again, we find around the world, you know, and it doesn't account for these stories of this group of people, quote unquote, gods, you know, whoever they are, that don't live on this planet, but come down to this planet and interact with humanity.
Couple questions from our audience here. John is asking, Dr. Louise, why do you suppose that archaeological scientists are so extremely resistant and even outright hostile to the proof that advanced human societies have come and gone many times for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years on this planet?
You know, they say that science is about discovery and exploration, and it's only in a couple of fields that we actually find that as being true. One area would be like quantum physics. We find that there are actually advances that are being made and being published. You know, all I can say is, you know, kind of the party line on this myself is that, you know, their tenure is being threatened, and they're just not allowed to publish. And then you have individuals who are willing to step forward and step outside the box, you know, and I'm thinking in particular of, oh man, his name just, I can see his face and I just had his name. Help me here. The guy who did the dating on the Sphinx, Robert Schoch. You know, he's a tenured professor in Boston. But he didn't start coming out with any of this, you know, alternative timeline stuff until he had already been granted his tenure, so they couldn't fire him. But even in the scientific community, they look at him like he's a kook, you know, but that's their way of helping to control them. It's like, well, you know, if you step outside of the line, we'll just, you know, say that you're a kook and, you know, discredit you. And so, you know, it's kind of like you can't win for losing, which is very sad. And so there are advances being made and things that are being unearthed that are just being shuffled away and not commented on. And the real evidence and the real information is not being put out there. You know, and I think even when we had the theory of evolution that was brought forth in the late 1800s, you know, how many years did it take before that became the doctrine? And so I think with some of this material, you have to wait for the old guard to die out so that the new guard can, you know, bring these concepts forward.
So who then is holding back the information or forcing these scientists to hold it back?
The people with the money.
Is that
I mean, if you lose your job and you lose your credibility as a scientist, you're not going to get paid. You know, you'll be a greeter at Walmart. You know, and why would you want to have that happen?
Very understandable. So basically what you're saying then is there's a lot of people who would like to expose this, but they don't have the opportunity to do so because they are in a catch-22 from giving the real information and possibly putting their career on the line versus continue to get paid and cover up research.
Well, I mean, I work as a medical intuitive. That's my day job. And so I've had several doctors, like regular medical doctors, internists or whatever, that have come to me for sessions. Okay. So they'll come to me for a session, but they will not refer any of their clients to me and work in cooperation with me because they can't let people know that they believe that what I do is actually beneficial and worthwhile.
So in the end, are they being told maybe, and I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on here as the conspiracy side of me comes through, are they being told by government officials, religious officials, who are maybe putting pressures on these universities to keep history as status quo rather than trying to figure out the origins of life?
Outside my area of knowledge, I would just be totally speculating on, that kind of a detail. I don't know. And it's just really sad. And you would think that after all of this time of people being on air and having this conversation, because this isn't the first time this conversation has been brought up on alternative radio or on regular radio, when you start talking about conspiracy theories, that it would lighten up. You would think something would change after so many people having this conversation, but it really hasn't.
It's just amazing to me that, on a much lower context, I actually write a blog every week on our website at spacedoutradio.com. And my blog last week was on science versus opinion. And to me, when I look into these fields, whether it's what you do, whether it's investigating UFOs, Bigfoot, the paranormal, whatever it is, we see a lot of people trying to put scientific fact on the back burner and actually using their opinion as actual scientific fact. Are you noticing that quite well in these theories that you were working on as well?
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't particularly like reading contemporary authors when I'm doing my research, because actually I have found many of them in the alternative field that put out their opinion and try to pass it off as scientific fact. And that just irritates me to no end. And even when you look at scientists, it's like they don't really know. I remember when I was working on the E.T. Chronicles book and I was looking at the age of the universe. But I mean, if we know that the universe is 13.5 billion years old, and it started with a Big Bang. So if we know this and it's a fact, then the universe should be a sphere, because it's expanding and it would just be this giant beach ball universe. But then when you start really digging into the age of the universe, you find out that the age of the universe is based on how far we can see out into space. So we can see 13.5 billion light years out into space. And that's it. And so it doesn't mean that the universe is 13.5 billion years old. It just means that that's all we've been able to see. That's a totally different thing. Totally different. But the 13.5 billion year number has been passed off as the universe is 13.5 billion years old. Period. And I think that if people identified this is a fact, gravity is a fact, things fall at 32 point whatever feet per second. I mean, that's a fact. The theory of evolution is a theory. It's a thought. It's a speculation. We don't know. We can just speculate at this point in time based on observation. And I think if people were clearer in what they were saying, then we would be in a better place versus things being put out as this is a fact when it's not, and it's just an opinion.
It drives me nuts. It drives me absolutely nuts. And I would love it if you would actually take a few moments after this show, not during, to read the blog that I wrote on it. Its context is similar to what you were talking about, but I think you'll fully understand because I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist. That's why I have my resident scientist, Eric Markham, as a part of this, because I actually bounce a lot of information and a lot of questions off of him before I go on a rant on the air, because in the end, when you do the job that I do, and you know from having your own radio show, the last thing you want to do is sound ignorant and stupid. So I'm able and very fortunate to be able to have Eric as our resident scientist really help me divulge what I'm trying to get through on a scientific matter. And one of the things that disappoints him in everything, and myself as well, is we have some brilliant people who are just shutting down the notion of absolutely everything. They don't want to believe. Maybe, like you said, their career is in jeopardy. They don't want to go public with their own personal beliefs. But what are we doing as part of society when science is supposed to be about saying yes or no to theory, and here we are trying to use opinion? And it goes so much further than just these topics. It goes with anything you want to take on this, whether it's the medical field and big pharma, whether it's 9/11, whether it's how many shooters and bullets were flying during the JFK assassination, and I'm going to have to take my tinfoil hat off here momentarily. But in the end, can people trust science?
I mean, in some areas, it is, right up there with religion and about belief and faith in who they are. I mean, I think that there is some good science, and I think that there is some science that, again, is, just speculation and hopes. Like they thought that, leeching people and bloodletting was good science at one point in time, but at this point, maybe not so much anymore. I don't know anyone that, has had a bloodletting recently. But you even find it in the alternative community. I wrote a piece on Göbekli Tepe, and I made a video and had a lot of complaints about it because it talked about the burying of Göbekli Tepe. But where I went with the piece was to talk about the rationale of why it was buried. And so my thought was that it was buried because the land was seen as being taboo, and based on ancient taboo customs, that if the person who died that owned a piece of property or whatever, or if it was so sacred that you couldn't touch it, you couldn't walk on it, so if you entered into a king's house, you couldn't touch anything. You know what I mean? Because everything was sacred and you would become taboo. And that's why the kings are often seen being carried on a litter, because if they touch the ground, then the ground would now be holy and it would be taboo to you and me. And so I did this whole long thing about the notion of taboo to support my notion that they buried Göbekli Tepe because that ground was seen as being taboo. And so even if they reused the stones in there were taboo. And so they would be passing on the curse of the taboo to the new structure. So the best way of protecting everyone was to bury it. Well, there are a few people that thought my thought was a good one, but most of them just want to go along with the party line. Oh, well, they buried it to preserve it for future generations, or, they buried it because there was a war coming up and they thought, well, we'll bury it to save it for another day. The standard ones that you hear about Göbekli Tepe. And so just because I'm not one of the big name alternative writers out there, not mentioning any names, I get dissed. And I think my theory, one, makes more sense. Just saying. And it's a theory, just like their theory. So why should I get dissed? I don't know. But it happens.
Oh, I know exactly what happens. You get laughed at, you get ridiculed, you get put on the back burner saying, oh, that lady's kind of crazy. You don't want to hang out with her or listen to her speak. It's just the way it goes in this community. We're all ready to slice each other's throat.
It's the same thing that happens in the scientific community.
True enough. And in fringe radio as well. See, this is why, I listen to all this, and this is why I got my degree in journalism. So I didn't have to deal with all of this. This is heavy stuff tonight, Doc.
Cool.
I do have to admit
I like making people's heads spin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's a good night. Gail has a question for you in the SOR Space Travelers Club. She is asking, and she says, I ask this respectfully. The global concept of God and gods has been well explained, but what is the entire point of it all?
I'm not even sure how to answer that. The entire point of all what? I guess would be my question.
I guess what she's trying to say, and Gail's an avid listener to this show. We call her Captain Shirk around here. I guess what she is asking in regards to this is we've heard all sorts of scientists, researchers, theologists kind of break down God or the gods, and yet we're no closer to finding a true answer to how this all begun. So what is the point?
And we have no answer as to why they're here, or why they created us, or why they had, and I think still have, a relationship with us. When you look at the mythic record, humanity is, we think that we're this grandiose thing. And when you look at the early mythic narratives, it's like we're not mentioned. We're kind of like the period at the end of the sentence. And so if you're telling the story of your life, do you really tell the story of your dog? And do you explain to your dog, well, I'm going to take you to this class so that you can have, training so that you can learn to sit and heal. I mean, because I want to be able to control you better. And, we don't explain ourselves to things that we think are inferior to ourselves. And so that's the only thought I can have as to why we don't know. Because they haven't ever told us. And there is no evidence in the mythic record that provides us any insights into why they're here, why they're interacting with us, what they want from us, what their agenda is. And there are people that are running around saying, well, this is their agenda. And it's like, maybe, I haven't seen any documentation on it, so I'm not there myself.
It is amazing, though, because people just need to grasp on to something to believe in, Dr. Rita. We're all waiting to just grasp on to whether it's God, whether it's chariots of fire, whether it's the ancient civilizations from Mesopotamia or wherever. We all want that one piece of history to kind of put our faith behind. So is it then, when you look at the whole grand scheme of things, because we only have a few minutes left with you here, is it a matter of just us as humans needing something to believe whether or not the truth comes out?
Well, I think that we have been programmed to believe, been programmed to believe in this, what could be potentially a fictitious entity, or this group that are not particularly nice or kind, and I think that ultimately we really need to believe in ourselves and believe in our innate nature. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about intuition and psychic abilities, and it's something that I believe we all have. I feel like there are innate laws that govern the universe. There are aspects of ourselves that are outside of our visual, perceptual, three-dimensional reality. They talk about this in a lot of Hindu texts, and it is not really talked about, but you see it in the things that are done in many indigenous cultures. But that is really about interacting with nature, interacting with this unseen world that we have really lost track of and really lost sight of, which can and might be God. What these stories are, don't make us necessarily closer to God. It's about our own personal experience that's going to make us closer to God.
Mm-hmm. I want to try and sneak in a couple of questions here. Mario is asking, Dr. Rita, can you explain the purpose of Globeki Tepe and what are the builders trying to tell us?
It was built for ritualistic purposes, right? That's what everybody says. I mean, we don't know, and no one, we don't know. And I think anybody that runs around and says, well, this is why it was built, is just pulling it out of their butt, because we don't know. And especially, there hasn't been enough of it excavated. I think they've, it's like 16 square acres and 22 of those circles, and they've uncovered like 4 or 5. And so we really don't know the extent of what's there and how that all plays together. So I think there's a lot more research on that site that needs to be done. And even with the research, we still will be speculating as to why it was built and what its purpose was.
We got time to sneak in one more question. It's more of a comment from John, but I'm curious to get your opinion. John says, I think rather that academia is censoring itself because of a consensus cowardice towards these type of topics. What's your opinion of that?
I can agree. It doesn't necessarily take into account the ridicule that people who step outside the box receive. But I agree. I mean, it definitely is. There's a certain amount of self-limiting that occurs in that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. We got about 2 minutes left with you tonight, Doc, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on Spaced Out Radio. I'm very, very interested in you taking a couple minutes here to just really define where people can find your movie, where they could find your books, your research.
Okay, so the best place for people to go to find me would be my primary website, which is soulhealer.com, soulhealer.com. I guess the easier way for them to find me would be going to ritalouise.com, which will take you to soulhealer.com. And that's kind of the portal to everything Dr. Rita. So it will take you to the videos that I have on YouTube that are free. It will take you to my articles. It will take you to my website, medicalintuitives.com, which is more my health and healing website. But, you can get to there from there. If you're interested in like medical intuition training, I offer that training. You can get to the portal, the AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com through that webpage. All of my books are on there. All of my books are also available on Amazon.com. Holy Deception, as well as Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancient, are both available on Amazon. Holy Deception is also available on Vimeo for download, rental, or purchase. Dave, $2.99. You can't even get a coffee for $2.99.
You cannot.
So
there you go. Thank you so much.
I just hope people go check it out because we just barely skimmed the surface of the movie, and I think they'll really enjoy it and gain value. And I don't answer questions. I just make people go,
And on that note, Doc, I got to say good night to you. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. It was an absolute pleasure to get the opportunity to finally meet up with you. And you are such a knowledgeable woman, and I would love to do this again with you. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. Coming up in hour number 3, because we have WQEE 99 Rock the Key on board with us now, we are going to get into Spaced Out Radio, what we're about. Everett Thiemer and Eric Markham are going to join me as we break it all down right after this. We'll be right back.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4 Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Spaced Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you with us, especially our brand new listeners on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia. We really appreciate you picking us up and joining us each and every night as we do this show 7 days a week, and we're going to break that down in hour number 3 because this next hour is just for you guys. Tomorrow night on the show, R. Keith Andrews is going to join us. He is our resident ET expert. We're going to be talking the ET Connection. It happens the first Friday of every month here on the Mighty SOR, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you with us. We are also live in Las Vegas on Renegade Talk Radio, and we are live on Revolution Radio. The Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell sets a password each and every night here on Spaced Out Radio. Tonight, your password is Mammothrept. Mammothrept is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, space travelers, because it is your password of the night. Hey, if you want to follow us on social media, you could do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio as well if you want to communicate with me live during the show. You're right in front of me, Twitterverse, so make sure you use that. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. You can also find us on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of great features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for just $5 a month. And also, make sure you head on over to patreon.com. We have some really cool features there for you as well. So make sure you head on over and give Spaced Out Radio a chance as well. Eric Markham and Everett Thiemer from my Spaced Out Radio team join us here in hour number 3. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi, glad to be here.
Hi, Dave. Hi, guys.
Good to have you guys with us. You know, one of the things that I'm very excited about is on July 4th, 2007, I was working in Vancouver. I read my final sportscast on terrestrial radio. And I'll tell you, it was an emotional moment because that's what I went to college for. I got my diploma in broadcast journalism from the British Columbia Institute of Technology, one of the finest programs in Canada in regards to radio broadcasting or broadcasting in general. And when I signed off the air that night, I had no idea that I would be coming back to terrestrial radio. Fast forward almost 10 years later, and thanks to Ian Holt, who is going to be a bi-monthly guest here on this show, talking everything from paranormal to Dracula to everything in between, he hooked us up with Ryan O'Neill, who runs WQEE 99, Rock the Key, down in Noonan, Georgia. And Noonan, Georgia may sound familiar to many people around this show, because if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, they film The Walking Dead in Noonan. And, you know, when Ryan and I talked the first time, he had opportunities to go get other shows. And you guys all know the shows that are broadcasting at this same time, maybe along these same topics. But he chose us. He chose us to deliver quality product in topics of the paranormal, supernatural, conspiratorial, spiritual. And, you know, I'm very thankful for that, guys. I'm very thankful for that opportunity, because when I started Spaced Out Radio a couple years ago, when it was just literally me, myself, and I, along with Jolene, Mrs. Spaced Out Radio, along with Johnny Enoch, who was working behind the scenes, we had no idea where this could go. Sure, we had a pipe dream. Man, you could be this next show. You could do this, man. But I'll tell you, it takes a lot of work and a great team. And since that date, we have built a great team. And as people listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key will find out, you're going to learn about Elizabeth Anglin and James Tyson, who host the weekends. Spaced Out Weekends, Saturdays and Sunday nights. You're going to learn about Everett Thiemer and Eric Markham, who take over our new news wire, which we have called The Encounter, as we look to expand on the journalistic side of the paranormal at spacedoutradio.com. And so tonight is kind of a little bit of a celebration, Everett and Eric, because we're starting to go where we need to go. That message is finally hitting terrestrial as of tonight. And granted, yes, on the United Public Radio Network, we're live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans. But now to have two stations that we call home that are terrestrial, we have to be thankful, Everett, to be able to get that message out on a more public scale than just online.
Oh, definitely. And I think you deserve a definite pat on the back from everybody in the team. You work really hard, and it shows. And I think one of the things that all your new listeners are going to really notice is the style difference. I mean, with your journalistic background, you bring so much more than so many other hosts do to these topics.
Well, and Everett, I want to ask you another question here. How important is it that the paranormal brings more journalistic integrity to this field?
I think it's incredibly important. In fact, when you made the comment about this being fringe radio, when we treat these topics as fringe, we just encourage the general public to go along with that and continue to treat them as fringe topics and look at them with kind of a sideways glance. So if we say that this is kind of a fringe area, we're going to draw people who maybe would go more mainstream or wouldn't go into the mainstream or aren't qualified to be mainstream journalists. And that's what we need. We need more people who are willing and able to treat it just as they would any other kind of topic.
And Eric, we bring you in here now because you have learned a lot during your time with Spaced Out Radio, which is coming up on a year now. Pretty darn quick here, believe it or not. When you look at where, and let's be honest here, you are our resident scientist. You are someone who is literally someone who has studied the field of the paranormal as well. How hard is it to try and balance this field with the mainstream, especially with what you do for a living as a scientist?
It's been a learning experience because for people who don't know, yes, I'm a honest to God, degreed scientist, but I have had encounters with, for lack of a better term, I'll say ghosts. I've seen UFOs. So here's this classically trained scientist who's starting to be open to the idea that, what I was trained for ain't all there is. I've always had an interest in things like Bigfoot. I was in the generation that grew up watching In Search Of, and I was, terrified by the movie Boggy Creek Monster, or Legend of Boggy Creek. I tried watching it the other day, and I laughed myself, into an asthma attack because all I could think of is, how did I find that so scary? But it did pique my interest in paranormal. So I think in the back of my mind, I've always been open to it. But in this last year, what might have been a door that was cracked open has been blown off its hinges. And just trying to find answers, trying to find truth. I mean, these things are happening. There's not that many crazy people on the planet. There's got to be a way of proving that these things exist. And that's where I'm at now. I know they're there. It's just I've got to figure out what they are, how they're manifesting, what kind of matter they are, and I want to share that with I want to share my findings with the world in general.
A lot of people, Eric, are experiencers, or they have a curiosity of these topics. Many people will keep their interest in these topics quite quiet, but they'll tell you one-on-one, maybe one-on-two, that they had a ghostly experience, or one time 12 years ago they saw this strange lights in the sky. Everyone has some sort of story, and everybody seems to have some sort of curiosity as to what is going on outside of the registered norm of society. How important is it for our new listeners out there, and every day we get new listeners, like with the expansion of our affiliate WQEE 99, Rock the Key today, how important is it for us to be able to talk about these topics and bring them to the forefront, even though the mainstream still calls what we do kind of taboo?
Well, it's a fact of life that the more data you have when you're doing an investigation or a study, the better that study will be. So as a pure scientist, I think the more people that come forward and share their experiences, and we take the commonalities to compare, the better. But as just an experiencer in my own right, I think it's very important to have a place where you can talk to other people who have experience. And even if your experience is off the charts weird, knowing that there's some place that you can put it out and it will be accepted. You won't be shouted down. You won't be called crazy. Is very important. I mean, it's even my own parents. I talk about some of the things that have happened, and though that as a published microbiologist, I got a little street cred with my father. You can tell it's like, okay, how is this the same kid that, got published in a journal and now he's talking? You can see that, not wanting to degrade me, but not wanting to jump on the bandwagon either. So it's nice to have a group like it in the chat room on Spreaker where you can just throw things out there and people are going to listen. And somebody else might have had a similar experience, and you can, I got a lot of people I can connect with through Facebook that from this show that we've talked about our experiences. It's therapeutic. It's very important to have that.
And Everett, he brings up a good point, Eric does, in regards that a lot of people listen to a show like this because they don't understand what has happened with them. And a show like this can be, lack of a better term, therapeutic, because for that fleeting moment, whether you're here for 10 minutes listening in or the entire 3-hour show, or sometimes when we go to overtime, which will be a 4-hour show, a lot of people really look at these topics as something that shouldn't exist. They're confused. They are not confident with what they have seen or what they've experienced, yet they come to a place like this and they find out that they're not alone. How comforting is that for a lot of people?
Oh, I imagine it's tremendously comforting to be able to come into, whether it be the Spreaker chat or the Facebook groups, and see that you're not alone, that there are other people out there, even if you haven't had the exact same experience, that there are people out there who are talking about what's happened to them. It can be tremendously valuable and comforting to know that you're not alone.
So when you figure out that you're not alone in this and that there are other people experiencing that, how important is it to take on a journalistic side the experience people are having and let them know that they just aren't crazy?
Well, I think both sides of the experience are really important. To recognize that people are having these experiences is very important, but at the same time, in terms of both science and journalism, to look at what is causing the experiences or where the experiences are coming from is just as important, I believe, because we want to know the answers. We want to find solutions or explanations or come up with theories on what is causing all of these different experiences. Mm-hmm. So we want to look at both sides, not just hear the story, but explore the story, and then see where we can go and take the next step. And that's why Eric is so important, because we can bounce ideas off of him all day long. And how can we do something to verify this occurrence?
Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we are trying to do that is on our website. We had what we called the SOR Space Wire, but we've now changed that to the Encounter. And I think the Encounter is something that is a little bit more edgy. We're going to be creating a lot more original content by a team of writers. Everett, why don't you take a couple of minutes to kind of set up what we are doing with the Encounter?
Well, we looked at a lot of different websites. The one thing that nobody really has out there is a radio show that is complemented by original material and original research. So we started taking a look and found some writers and created a team that are going to document both experiences, but then also take some time and go in and explore and do some research and do some really high quality articles and papers and materials on all sorts of topics, instead of just repeating, the same ghost story just at a different location. We're going to be investigating and again, working with Eric to create and do research and create some basically research quality papers. We're not going to just have, story after story that's just kind of a retelling. We're going to have original research as well.
So getting back to the whole idea of making it more interactive for people, a lot of people, Everett, don't believe that or don't take the time to actually read articles anymore, to read journalism anymore. I mean, we hear so much of fake news and political views, whether you're left or right, or different views on different topics, what's real, what's wrong. Why can our listeners of Spaced Out Radio trust what we are printing in the Encounter?
Because every one of us that's involved, from you to Eric to Markham to the entire team, is dedicated and interested not in making a ton of money or getting famous or, having the next viral story. We are all genuinely interested in learning and finding the answers. We want to delve into these topics not because we want to create news or make ourselves popular, but because we all have a genuine desire and interest to know what is really going on.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, we bring you back in here now because with the Encounter, you started off the Space Wire, but we've kind of taken it to a different level. And you're going to be writing a lot more on the scientific aspect of a lot of the paranormal does. How important is it that someone actually takes the step up and starts bringing, and I'll put it out there, the credibility to paranormal research?
Oh, it's very important because by and large, if you say, I do paranormal research, people look at you like you've got carrots growing out of your eyebrows, and it's got that giggle factor. And until somebody like our team starts knuckling down and gets more and more involved with finding what these things are than getting that picture or getting that EVP, I mean, we got to find some real data, because with Photoshop, I could make all the ghost pictures in the world I wanted. And an EVP is, I've got my own that I recorded here about 2 weeks ago. And I can almost talk myself out of it because it's a recording device. Could have glitched, in order to be taken seriously, we're going to have to look at this phenomena and say, all right, when this apparition manifested, these are the changes in the physical state of the environment. There's going to have to be some hard data gathered, and it's very important that somebody just quits waving pictures around and starts throwing hard data out there.
That data that is out there, I think, is probably the most critical piece of information on what we are trying to bring out on Spaced Out Radio each and every night. And one of the things, and for our new listeners who are just kind of kicking into things here and trying to understand or figure out what we do, what we really strongly believe in is finding answers. Sure, we can gather up all the information. If you're a paranormal team, you can grab all the EVPs, foggy pictures, orbs on video, whatever you want. If you're a Bigfoot hunter, you can grab all the castings or what we believe to be hair samples or whatever you want to grab. You can grab as many as you want. If you're a UFO person and you're outside filming UFOs, you can get as many videos of, small blinking lights as you possibly can. The question is, and what we are trying to solve here at Spaced Out Radio, is what do we do with the evidence? Example, we have a lot of paranormal teams that want to come on this show. They don't all get on because I ask them a couple of simple questions. And those questions are, what do you do with your evidence? Usually you'll get, well, we gather it for further study. Great. Good question. What do you do afterwards with it? Well, we store it with the rest of the evidence so we can basically shop and compare. Great. What do you do with your evidence after that? 3 questions, and you've stumped them. And that's
I think we're going... Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, I think we're going to create that next step, that when you ask somebody, what do you do with your evidence, we're going to try and fill that need or that void of what can they do with their evidence. I know Eric has some incredible experiments sort of in the work to be designed. We've talked about some different ways of archiving things and putting things out there so that all of these people who have had experiences and all of these groups that have their evidence, we can kind of collect it all in one spot and actually try and do something with it other than have somebody just keep it on their hard drive or, a memory card in a drawer just not being used.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't want to sequester this information and, squirrel it away like a miser. I want it out there. I want somebody to look at my experimental model and say, the flaw is that you didn't account for XYZ. And I'll guarantee you the next time I go out in the field, XYZ will be accounted for. I want that feedback. Science, science has evolved into this weird kind of religion. Science is a tool. Just like a hammer, a screwdriver, take your pick. All science is a tool and a method of, or supposed to be a method of divulging and finding the truth. It's not a religion. It's not a end into itself. It's simply a discipline and a tool. And if you don't use it correctly, you're fooling yourself. These groups that go out waving a bunch of meters in the air saying we're doing a scientific study make me laugh. It's, sorry, but you're not doing anything but running around waving technology in the air. The only science is what's in your hand, the electronic engineer that came up with the tri-field meter. everything else is a game.
Eric, I have a question for you from Robert in the Space Out Radio chat room on Spreaker. He is asking, what happens, Eric, if some government agent tells you not to share it?
I have a long history of telling authority figures to bite me. Since we're on terrestrial radio, I'll calm it down. I'm not gonna listen. I don't have anything they can really take away from me. You know, it's like,
what if they confiscated the guitar collection?
Oh, you hit me below the belt.
Uh-huh.
I can always buy more guitars.
What about the Star Trek toys?
Oh, now you're playing dirty, Dave.
Yes. Yes, I thought I would hit below the belt on that one.
Oh, I should be singing soprano after that one. No, I would, I'd let the data out. It's got to be let out.
Absolutely.
It's got to go out there. And once it's out there, I've done my job. I'm not looking for that movie contract or that next big reality show contract or anything. I am simply wanting to find answers because I have had these experiences that are so far out of my workaday life. You know,
but
I've got to find answers.
Eric, are the answers out there, though?
They gotta be. If the phenomenon is real, if this thing that people are seeing, these ghosts, these craft, you know, these cryptids, if there's a physical being or something that can at moments be physical, there are answers. Now, the hard part is figuring out how to quantify these properties. You know, what makes a ghost form a shadow? Well, if you see a shadow, it means it's blocking a portion of the full spectrum, because black is, you know, if something's black, that means it's absorbing or blocking the full spectrum, not the 100% of the light that's going through it, but it's interacting with the full spectrum. So that says that there is a physical manifestation. There's something that the photon's reacting. That's what we got to find out. You know, that might be the one thing we find out that blows the lid off the whole phenomenon.
Ever getting back to the journalistic side, on the encounter, we are going to have a mixed range of our own personal writing team developing fresh new content and stories within the paranormal, but we're also going to be adding a category of other news outlets, whether it's Huffington Post, whether it's Yahoo, whether it's CNN, Fox, CBC, wherever it may be. We're going to be adding those type of stories that deal with things that are odd and paranormal as well. How important is it to make sure that we have diversity in every type of story that we do, and quality of research to know that we're not putting a bunch of clickbait on the encounter?
It's very important. I think we've talked a lot on the show about people getting their news and their views and their ideas from different sources. And I think that by adding this other content from other sources, certainly it's going to help people form opinions. Not that we're trying to, you know, force feed them our views, but it's going to show them that there are other sources out there and that they can look around and find, you know, come to Spaced Out Radio, find our content, start to form an opinion, and go to these other sites and research and really learn for yourself and form an opinion. And I think that is that's an incredible advantage, and I think people will come away from the show and from the website smarter and more intelligent and with a better view on the world by doing that.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. And I just want to see quality writing. And I think I'm like a lot of people out there who want to have their stories have fact, not a simple base of opinion. You know, we're talking real journalism here. We're not talking commentary or some sort of opinion piece where somebody gives a couple of minor facts on a headline and then does an entire diatribe on what the story should be like and where they missed out on things and where they need to get their information from, because we're not here to critique. We're here to tell the story. It's about, for the first time, actually bringing some sort of clear, conscious journalism to this field, isn't it, Everett?
Oh, exactly. And we will have this excuse me, this isn't going to be just dry research paper after research paper. We are going to have, you know, people's experiences and stories told, but where we're going to be different is we're not going to start inserting facts. We're not going to say things like, well, it must be or it had to be because of this. And that's one thing that you've always been very, very strong on, and I think everybody on the team is very strong on, is that opinion is opinion, fact is fact. So we will have, you know, ghost stories and some interesting reads and some fun reads mixed in with research, but we're going to get away from what all of, I should say, so many of the other websites do, where you read the first paragraph and you think you're going to come away from something having learned something, and instead you get an author's opinions and views told to you like, you know, like they're the authority and that this is what it had to be. We're going to stay away from that.
I've been asked if we're going to be adding any 60-second hockey commentaries on that. We just may, especially around big days like the trade deadline, something like that. And our new list,
or when the Blackhawks win again.
Yeah, well, we got to be careful because our new listeners in Atlanta might be still a little upset that their hockey team left a couple of years ago for Winnipeg. So we got to be careful with that one now. You know, because we do care. We do care around here. But in the end, getting back to the serious side of things, you know, when it comes to Space Out Radio, you know, our job and what we are trying to accomplish and what we continue to grow with WQEE coming on board now is we're trying to become a little bit more than just what your average paranormal team. We're not a podcast. We aren't a podcast. We're a live radio show. Sure, we may be online, but we're a live radio show that continues to try and bring the forefront of journalism to these topics. And Eric, you've learned quite almost on a running sense rather than a walking, then jogging, then running. You know, you've had to come in running on this. As an outsider who was a big fan of paranormal radio previous to this, how did you feel about coming into a situation like this where we're trying to do things on more of a little bit of a journalistic way?
It was refreshing. I was what we've referred to in the past as an orphan listener. When the big guy left the scene the last time, I just was at a loss. There was no place. I didn't like the other show, and there was just nothing out there. And the first couple of your shows I saw or listened to, this is where I've been looking for. It's a different approach. It's fresh. It's the person who's being interviewed gets their say. Whether we agree with them or not, they get to say they get to make their points, with rare exception. We've had a couple guests that were made 3 hours an eternity, but, they got their say. And that was refreshing that they weren't getting shouted down. They weren't getting derided, whatever they sounded like. And I think that's important. That's what sets us above and beyond whatever else is out there. It's not your opinion that you're trying to make a guest conform to. But by the same token, you're not drinking the Kool-Aid either. So it's a great balance of, the questions you ask, the way you analyze. It's what was missing. I don't think anybody's had this approach yet. And I've listened to just about all of them at one time, and I find that what we do here on Spaced Out Radio is a unique, and I'll say it might be self-aggrandizing, but I believe that this broadcast is a cut above anything else out there as a listener.
Oh, you're just saying that now. You're just saying
Yeah, I am. I expect that check in the mail now, buddy.
Exactly.
No, that was not a paid endorsement. That was from the heart.
But, Eric's right, though, because I was a listener long before you and I had ever met or talked. I was a listener and a fan before I ever became involved with it. So he's completely right.
Well, the only thing that we're going to have...
with a call-in. That's back when you took call-ins. And I don't know, I forgot I don't even remember what the subject was. I called in one night, and I think you took me... I was on for 45 minutes or something. And
yeah, that was a fun night.
That was fun. Yeah, and it was just at that point I realized that, this is something I could get behind, that I could make that emotional commitment from. Because I had called into another show, and I never really got my question out there. It was time for the next caller. So, but yeah, this is a completely different, unique way of doing things, and as a listener, I like it a lot.
Mm-hmm. And on weekends, for our new listeners, with James Tyson on Spaced Out Weekend, he will actually have a show called Two Mediums and a Large. So if you're one of those people out there who likes to get a free psychic reading, you can call in on the weekends and actually get a free psychic reading from some very, very talented ladies as well. Gail has a question, and Everett, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then Eric, I'm going to get your opinion. Gail is saying, people try to build the house without laying the foundation or framing it. She's painting a beautiful picture here.
Yes, she always does.
Yes, she does. They all need to define their mission, establish goals, and the purpose of their activities. Is that possible to set that as a standard?
I think we have. I mean, we've talked about your plans and the goals extensively. We've put pieces in place before we've ever mentioned them or talked about them. We're not doing anything just because it seems like a good idea. We're doing it because it works best for the listeners. So yeah, I think it's perfectly possible.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, Eric?
Well, I think from the start we had a goal in mind. People aren't aware of all the hours that you put into this, and that we all put into this. And I mean, it's a willing sacrifice that we make, and we believe in what we're doing, and we're not going at it in some kind of half-assed, grab this, grab that. We try things. If they fit within the framework of what we're trying to do, if they don't work, well, we don't do it again. If it works, we try to better it. We do pretty much a constant process improvement through, in the back room chats and stuff that we carry on. I don't think that you're going to find that. We don't go for the sensationalism. We're trying to nail this stuff down, and it's been that way from the start.
Well, and that's a big one right there. This show is becoming so popular. Right now, we are booked 7 weeks in advance. We're usually booked 7 to 10 weeks in advance to get a guest on this show. And that is in recognition to a lot of pushing that we do. But it's also getting to the point, too, with a lot of guests where they're hearing about what we're doing and they want to be a part of it. And they ask if they could come on the show. Dr. Rita Louise, who we had on earlier tonight, she was like that. She's like, Dave, well, why haven't we done a show? And I was like, okay, let's do one, because it's kind of simple that way. But in the end, we try and vet everybody out. We try and make sure that, not every Tom, Dick, or Harry gets on this show. We can't have it that way. We need to be able to make sure that we have the best intentions of our audience at the forefront at every time. You know what I'm saying? Because in the end, the one thing that we are trying to do for our listeners is we are trying to make sure that they have an understanding that, if we're bringing our A game to the table every night, that they got to be able to be entertained. They got to be able to understand that there are certain things we don't do on this show. We don't fearmonger. Okay? There is absolutely no fearmongering on this show. So when you hear people like Alex Jones going on the air saying, damn it, we know who's going to win the Super Bowl. We're going to break this news here later on. And then comes on and says, the winner of the Super Bowl is the owners. And I'm doing the face rub as I say this, because you notice he's always rubbing his face. The owners and the advertisers. Well, no kidding. You're fear-mongering over that? We don't do that. We don't do doom and gloom. Rarely will we get into politics. Rarely. We don't do anything to do with a lot of topics that are on other shows like this. You're not going to hear about nutrition because I like tacos and burgers. You're not going to hear about solar flares burning up the earth, because to me that's fear-mongering. 98% of the population has no idea what nanotechnology is, nor do they care. We're going to make sure that there are certain topics, like I said, that just are not on here. And we do that because our audience wants to hear about ghosts. They want to hear about hauntings, alien abduction, Bigfoot, Dogman, critters that are not supposed to exist, conspiracy theories.
Eric,
go ahead.
Eric had alluded to it a little bit before about the things that go on behind the scenes, so to speak. And we have a team that consists of skeptics, a scientist, experiencers, psychics, empaths. We have a team that can sit down and talk and come up with show ideas and come up with things that are best for the show, all without getting into a fist fight. And I think that really, really shines in the show. That comes through, and that's something that a lot of other shows don't have, and a lot of journalism doesn't have. It's just a single point of view, where we have a team that really gets along fantastically well, even though in theory it probably shouldn't.
No, you're probably right on that. You're probably right on that. But that's what we've done, is we have built a team here that is trying very hard to continue to push the word. And that word is honesty and we'll throw in another word, integrity. Integrity is huge for what we are doing. And in the end, the people will come. The listeners will come because they have built that credibility. They understand there's credibility there, guys. And in the end, that's what all we can ask for.
Well, yeah, we go through a lot. One of the snags I ran into with doing the Spacewire news is trying to find stuff that wasn't clickbait or just totally unsubstantiated. You know, I wanted to see it from, if I found a story I thought was interesting, I wanted to see if it was on some more credible sites. And there's a lot of just crap out there. It looks good. I'd like to think the Russians might have found a UFO in Antarctica, but by the same token, it's a lot like it sounded like the script from The Thing. So, you know, it's hard to, it's, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into putting the paranormal news out there, because we do want to have that integrity. We want somebody to look at our site and know that we vetted this, and if we post it, we're pretty sure that it's true. We've actually looked at as well, you know, we've done our due diligence to try to find out if this thing is, you know, did this happen? And, you know, it takes some time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. And the one thing that I do want to say to our new listeners is that you can always reach out to us. And that goes for any of our previous listeners as well, if you haven't figured it out. We're pretty open people around here. We have one rule, and that is we have to have fun. But if you see us on social media, which we're all over, you want to get a question answered, feel free to just ask. I love answering questions. I got to read this story here, guys. I have to read this story. I got an awesome email from one of our listeners. Her name is Shannon from Spokane, Washington. And I love getting listener email. There's something about it that just, it puts a smile on my face. So she titled it Just a Little Note. She goes, "Hello, Dave." And I'm going to read it verbatim here. "Hello, Dave. Thought I would drop you a line and let you know I love your show and listen to you almost every day by podcast download, past and present shows. I want to share my experience with you. I live in the U.S., and like many of us Americans, I decided to go through a fast food drive-thru at Jack in the Box and purchase a not-so-good lunch for me. I pulled over in the parking lot area to eat hurriedly before I went on to my next commitment for the day. With my window down, my heat was blasting in my car, and I had gotten too hot. I had your podcast blasting. I looked out my window, and this dude, who looked like a stereotypical gangbanger, was looking at me and started walking toward my car. I was embarrassed about my quote-unquote topic on the radio. In brackets, she puts, only because the mainstream idiotic society is still asleep and thinks that people are crazy who listen to this stuff, end quote, or end bracket. She goes, so I turned it down. She then says, the dude walks up to my car and asks, what radio station are you listening to? So I told him all about Spaced Out Radio and how to get it by download. He asks, and they talk about space a lot? And she said, oh yes. That and all the other stuff that society considers weird crap. She used a different word there, but since we're on terrestrial radio, we can't use that anymore. He looked all excited and thanked me for the information and says he loves that stuff. Wow, I never would have guessed. So, Dave, I'm passing on the info for you. The episode I was listening to was the one you just did with Harvey Kraft, Science and Sci-Fi Buddha Guy. And that was last night's episode. Keep up the good work, Shannon in Spokane. So, Shannon, thank you so much. But that is what we do. That is how we spread the word. That is the fun of this all. And that is why we do it. So for all our new listeners out there, whether you're on UPRN, WQEE, Renegade Talk Radio, Revolution Radio, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, or you just find us on iTunes, RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, Stitcher, wherever you find us. We're here to be the show for you. We really are. That's what means the best, the most to me as the host of this show. And I know James and Elizabeth feel that way as well. Because in the end, the experience is about you guys. Our job is to help you find the answers. Isn't that right, Everett?
Oh, I completely agree.
And that's why we have a scientist. We lucked out with that. We absolutely lucked out with that.
No, I feel like I'm the one that lucked out, to be honest.
You're way too romantic, preacher. You're way too romantic. So, just for our new listeners, so you know, I live in British Columbia, Canada. So for our brand new listeners way down in Georgia, if you hear a Canadian accent, that's my fault. But I'm way up here in central, mid British Columbia, Canada. Eric is in North Carolina. Everett's near Chicago. KJ, part of our team, is in Florida. We have Catherine. I don't know where she is. I really don't. We have Jolene and Lana. They live in our area. Corey, when she gets back with it, she lives in our area as well. Down by Vancouver, we have James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. We have Elizabeth Anglin from New Mexico. So we have, I think, one of the strongest teams going. And we're going to continue to bring it every single night, including Staten Island's own Ron Bumblefoot THAL. Now, if you're a fan of GNR, like old Davey is here, you'll know that Mr. Bumblefoot was the former guitarist, replaced by Slash of all people. But that's okay. Mr. Bumblefoot is the official music of this show, takes us in and brings us home every single night with a little bit of Little Brother is Watching. You can check out Bumblefoot on our website, SpaceOutRadio.com. We want to thank Dr. Rita Louise, who appeared on this show for the first 2 hours talking about the holy deception. And Everett Thiemer and Eric Markham from SpaceOutRadio.com and The Encounter, which will be taking off very, very soon. Hey, if you're a writer and you want to maybe try and get a paranormal article in, message Everett Thiemer on social media. He is taking applications for people who want to write the proper way, provide quality journalism. Tomorrow night on the show, it's the first Friday of the month. Our Keith Andrews is going to join us. The ET Connection gets going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. And we're live, always at spacedoutradio.com. Don't forget, check us out at patreon.com. We got some really cool features that you can buy into. Very affordable as we try and make this thing grow. And do us a favor. Spread the word. Just like Shannon did. Thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciated you doing that, and that's why I wanted to read your letter on the air. That's how we spread the word, my friends. You guys are like family now. And we'll see you in exactly 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, take us home. Good night.
This is the new totalitarian state. 1,000 eyes are waiting for you to break. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you fall.